Well, good morning. My name is Jonathan Zittrain. I teach here at the law school, and we have a special treat today. In some ways, it is a hearkening back to a past of the 70s and 80s when there was a creature called Socratic dialogue. A guy named Fred Friendly got things started on PBS. You may have seen such things. It's people with plaid blazers. I guess this is a subtle plaid. Would pose hypotheticals to one another and to a distinguished panel of guests, which we have managed to replicate here, and to see where the hypothetical plays out. And because it's hypothetical, we have the freedom to speak our minds, how we would actually process it were we in the role that we are in. And we have a number of folks who we're about to introduce them in their current roles. We can see how much wisdom and thought they're going to bring to today's hypothetical. First, a warning that should not be needed on a panel involving surveillance, but we are all being surveilled. This is being webcast live to an audience of indeterminate size and may be used against you at any later time. And I also just want to thank a number of the people that have been involved in pulling together today's hypothetical. That includes Samantha Bates, Jordi Weinstock, Adi Kamdar, Lydia Licklider, and others from our rare search group, John Bowers, Annabelle Kupke. Whom else am I missing? Anybody else to thank for pulling together our hypothetical today? Really? I'm sure I'll hear about it later, but thank you all for having done it. And without further ado, let's get started. But first, let's introduce people in their real-world guises. Alex MacGillivray, class of 2000, let's start with you. You have a not only checkered, but colored and kaleidoscopic history with a coder before law school, a coder during law school, then off to...
I really should just let you struggle. This will be the one time that
Well, you ended up at Twitter, but I feel like there was something in between. Was it MTV?
I did Wilson Sonsini and then Google.
Wilson Sonsini, then Google as a lawyer, working on the Google Books project.
Yep.
Which was a great attempt at a success. And then, may yet be, then general counsel of Twitter, which everybody loves, and then the White House, which everybody loves, and now in Spain, convalescing.
Unemployment, which
Yes.
everybody loves.
So thank you for coming out of your senescence to join us today on the panel. Cindy Cohn, currently executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. By way of disclosure, I should say I'm on the board of that. Cindy, what else should we know about your background?
Oh, I don't know. I guess you might want to know that in the 1990s, I helped free encryption from government regulatory control, making an argument that code is speech protected by the First Amendment, and the government's regulations on code didn't meet the First Amendment tests.
The days of the Clipper chip.
That would be Crypto Wars Part 1. Now we're in
For which we are now farther along the line.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your service. Alex Abdo, former tort student extraordinaire, who then went on to the American Civil Liberties Union, now at the brand new Knight Institute for the First Amendment. Any highlights we should know of from your work?
If you think the president shouldn't block critics on Twitter, then you should follow our work at the Knight Institute.
That's right. There's a current suit challenging the action of @RealDonaldTrump blocking people.
That's right.
Got it. For which the remedy they actually want is to be able to read his tweets. Or is it more the direct messaging they're looking
There's a
for?
bit more to it than that.
Fair enough. There's a constitutional principle at stake. I want the right not to read the tweets that I'm allowed to see. Got it. Right. Bruce Schneier, cryptologist, cryptographer, I never knew the difference, security technologist, Dungeons & Dragons player extraordinaire, chef. What else should we know?
I like to think I work in the intersection of security technology and policy, writing about privacy and security and data. I don't know, I teach here now and fellow at the Berkman Klein Center.
Wonderful. You are indeed at the intersection. Thank you. David Sanger from the New York Times. What should we know of your background?
Let's see. Went to college here, foreign correspondent for many years. Came back to Washington, and I'm in year 23 of a 3-year assignment to Washington. So when you get stuck in the swamp, you're really stuck. And covered the White House, covered technology, cover a lot of national security issues, have had more leak investigations directed at me than I probably would care to recall.
All of them earned.
All of them earned, I hope.
Yes.
I hope. And teach national security here at the Kennedy School.
Perfect. Thank you. Daphna Renan, assistant professor here at the law school, former Department of Justice official, yes?
Yes.
In the Office of Legal Counsel, was it?
Yeah, so from 2009 to 2012, I was there first in the Deputy Attorney General's office and then in the Office of Legal Counsel.
And what is the Office of Legal Counsel? Why does the Justice Department need a lawyer?
Well, so the Office of Legal Counsel is the lawyer to more than the Justice Department. It's the office located inside DOJ that advises the White House, the intelligence community, the executive branch agencies, and DOJ on complex constitutional and statutory questions.
Got it. Does the OLC have a lawyer? That's it. The buck stops with
That's
the OLC.
right, that's right.
Got it. Matt Olson, class of '88, former general counsel of the National Security Agency, former director of the U.S. Counterterrorism Center. Anything else we should know about your background?
Probably a proud card-carrying member of the deep state after many, many years doing that.
Isn't it like being a hipster? If you say that's what you are, you
that's
can't
it.
be?
You own it. You
I
embrace
see.
that role.
I see.
And I think I might be one of the few government people as the introductions go around. So I'm expecting.
Yes. You have quite a burden to carry
have a lot
today,
on my
along with
shoulders.
Daphna.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Andrew McLaughlin, class of '94, former secretary of the board of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN.
That is true. That's not really what my job was, but if you want to pull out the weirdest title in my quiver, okay.
Generally dyspeptic and combative.
That's right. But it's important to point out, Jonathan, that you and I have shared a residence for something like 8 years of our adult lives.
But not currently.
And so,
at least to my
not
knowledge.
currently, that's true. But
Yes.
so my combativeness with you is earned.
Yes, very good. We
Need
were
I bring
former
up-
law school roommates and DC working roommates.
Also true.
Yes, and I appreciate your lending me your car all of those times.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to bring up the issue of the breakfast bars again. It's
Thank
just-
you again. I will remind you this is being webcast. And ended up working at Google as basically Google's Secretary of State. Is that the right description?
A policy guy.
A policy guy. Nothing to see here, folks. Just a small, cute little fox in the chicken coop. And then on to the White House, yes?
That's
Deputy
right.
Chief Technology Officer of the United States?
That's right. My role was to screw up a bunch of stuff that Alex then showed up to fix later.
Got it. Well, we hope you can replicate that again on the panel today. And also, more recently, you've been at BetaWorks, which is an incubator/investor in a number of companies, which also has made you, I guess, CEO of such companies as Instapaper.
That's true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Very good. And now you are director of a new center for innovation at Yale.
At Yale, that's right. And off to the side, we've built a kind of like an investment firm for startups that help Democrats win elections. It's a thing I've been doing since November.
Got it. How's it going so far?
Obviously, an overwhelming triumph.
Yes. If they lose, do you still win?
No.
Well, at least the incentives are aligned.
None of us win.
Very good. All right, so that is our opening panel. And it's not only helpful to know their backgrounds, but also to realize that for all of the organizations and roles we just described, our panel will emphatically not be representing any of them as we get into our hypothetical. And speaking of getting into our hypothetical, here it is. David Sanger, you're sitting at your desk at the New York Times. Your plain old landline telephone rings. You hear the shielded voice that's been distorted by some dime store, museum of the spy kind of thing. This person says, I've got some neat documents for you that you might be interested in. It shows surveillance power abuse by a private company. Are you interested in hearing more?
Interested in hearing more, but the chances that my landline would be either answered or would work under current circumstances is pretty low. But we'll take it.
I'll allow you to retcon the hypothetical to be you receive an email from a Pluto mail address from somebody who purports to work for a small firm that few have heard of called Faceplant. And Faceplant is kind of one of these social network things. It's like Peach, even better. Remember Peach?
I do, actually.
No? Peach had its day in the sun. But this is Faceplant, and it allows people to exchange messages, to post stuff. It's got a little Dropbox-style functionality, and they're ready to send you some documents. Are you going to go ahead and take them?
We'll take them encrypted.
You'll take them encrypted. And do you have it? Is it now easy peasy to get encrypted documents to the New York Times?
Easy peasy.
Or in this case, to the Ames County Gazette?
I don't know how well Ames County's worked on encryption,
Promotion.
but thanks to Cindy, we're good on encryption now. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. So this person sends along to you a document that's going to be a little hard to read on our screen, but it appears to be from the Ames County Police Department, the Crimes Against Children Division, and it is addressed to a Simon Greenleaf, who is Director of Law Enforcement Relations at Faceplant. And it appears to be requesting an urgent search to be performed across the platform because of a credible threat of violence against a person in the real world, in fact, against a kid. And they're asking that it go all the way across all of Faceplant's servers. And what they're looking for is attached to this letter. By the way, we see on the letter that Simon Greenleaf, the recipient, has said, yes, let's make it happen. So he's scrawled at the bottom an approval for this kind of search. And here's the exhibit. It's a happy kid at a playground, and there's a circle around him, and it says, I know who you care about, and I will hurt them. And apparently the parent of this child received this, sent it to the Ames County Police. The Ames County Police have in turn asked Faceplant to search all of their records of all of their users, and if this photo, exactly including the circle and the menacing message in that format, bit by bit, if that is not found, nothing comes back. If it is found, they may have a few users for whom they can then do further process. And it looks from this letter as if Faceplant went ahead and did this search. So I'm wondering first, on a scale of meh to 10, how much is this a news story for you?
It's probably a little closer to meh than 10. But one of the first questions would be, is the search driven by the terms of service at Faceplant? Or is this something that would actually require a warrant?
It appears to have been done from that letter with
Based
no
on-
warrant at all. It was
Right.
just a request.
So I'm assuming from that, although we would have to go figure this out with Faceplant,
Yes.
that they did this based on their terms of service.
Well, that's a good question. Are you going to call Faceplant?
I might after I learned a little bit more about it, but you wouldn't want to make Faceplant your first call on something like that.
Who would you call? You'd read the terms of service first?
You probably would, or you'd go to somebody. We probably have a reporter someplace who covers Faceplant. We may have 5.
Oh, it's a small startup. Nobody's heard of it.
Oh, okay.
It's like Peach.
Right. But the other thing that we would go do is try to go talk to the source here and understand how the source got the document a little bit, what the source's motives were before we leapt off into the wild world of Faceplant.
You've written back to the source. The source wrote back to you and says, I'm so sorry, I have to shampoo my cat. I'll be back in a week, and goes silent. But you do have the documents. And you've looked at the Faceplant terms of service, which, as typical, I think, I don't know, maybe I should actually ask, who here has had fun drafting terms of service? Alex, you're a terms of service
I think
person.
the faceplant terms of service say all your base are belong to us.
Cleverer.
More or less that.
And by that, do you mean we can do what we want when we want?
Yes.
In which case, why do we ever need a warrant?
Would do.
Why do we ever need a warrant?
Well, so that I think the way a lot of these companies think about the terms of service versus their internal policies with respect to talking to law enforcement, the terms of service are much more about protecting from class actions from users, which is why they become extremely defensive, non-user-friendly documents. For the most part, there are exceptions, but the way they think about it internally in terms of responding is much different. So they might have a terms of service that allows them a broad latitude, but internal policies, and those policies may even be public policies, that would say that they wouldn't respond to something like this without a warrant.
So let's say the terms of service, translating your all your base comment, basically say, in matters of protecting the public safety, public property, and our own networks, we reserve the right to perform searches in support of those goals. That's the kind of thing you're thinking of that's class action immunity?
Yeah, and a lot of them will have even specific reference to child protection, so that they're trying to wrap it in a particularly resonant moral.
And I feel like you've now made yourself general counsel of Faceplant.
I really hope not. I thought that was Andrew's job.
No, you stepped up. And this wasn't your letter, though. This was before your time, but now you're in the hot seat. Knowing that this letter, which I guess maybe you hear about if David has called you yet, but he seems to be holding back.
I won't hold back for too long. If we come to the conclusion fairly quickly, this could well be within the terms of service, and you want to figure out if it's a news story or it's not a news story, I might well call Faceplant at that moment, yeah.
Great. All right, so we have an old-fashioned telephone call going on. Alex, do you take this call?
Yeah, I probably do. It's a good question as to whether. So first of all, there's a question about whether you would comment on a particular case. This is about a particular person.
But you're going to take the call.
Particular investigation. Well, I think you always take a call from David Sanger.
All right, let's hear the call.
Not a great
David,
idea not
Alex,
to.
you're now connected. Go.
Alex, how you been?
Great to hear from you.
It's always good to have a joyful greeting to the call. So we have a letter here from, appears to be a request from a police department asking you to search for the photograph of a child who, if you believe the information we were given, his family was threatened over a Faceplant network. Before we get to the specifics of it, what are your general rules when you when you receive a report of a threat that is conveyed over your network?
So I just came on board here, so I'm still coming up to speed on what our rules are. So I think the way I would answer this to further the hypothetical would be something like our general rules are that we require a warrant when we're going to give over user information. We have some exceptions with that for particular threats of violence that seem to be urgent and actionable, where we might cooperate with law enforcement on those types of things. But our general policy is require a warrant and give notice to the user.
Okay. So if you go into your email, I've just shot you a picture of a letter. Maybe you can put the letter back up. And it seems to have some handwriting underneath it that says, yes, let's make this happen, SG. Do you know who SG might be?
He must have been, before my time, I think we fired a director of law enforcement relations.
Is he now teaching at a law school?
At the law school, or he could be a partner at BetaWorks.
Okay, so recognizing that you're probably hesitant to talk about specific and individual cases, I'm going to ask you to talk about a specific and individual case. Because this one would seem to suggest, and it might be perfectly reasonable, that you helped this police department because of a photograph that appeared to threaten the kidnapping or harm of a small child. Anything you can tell us about this one?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the specific cases. It's really between, it's up to law enforcement dealing with the current investigation, and it's not something that I would comment on. Leave it at that.
Okay. You might want to check back with your public affairs people and so forth, because we're in one of those odd situations, actually not so odd, happens all the time, in which a company doesn't want to comment on a specific case, but you can see we've got the material from the specific case. And usually my advice along those lines is you have two choices. You can comment on it when we're getting ready to write it the first time and give a good explanation of what you're doing, or you can wait for us to publish it and you can comment on it tomorrow morning when it goes viral on some network. So I would sort of consider about when you want to do the timing of the comment that's inevitable.
Boy, David's quite a good counselor.
He's very concerned about when I'm going to get my whipping.
Yeah. Are you going to take his advice?
No, I think the way I would respond, David, is that I'm not going to comment on the specific case. I will give you a little bit more detail about how we handle these types of cases, and in particular some of the thinking behind the philosophy that Faceplant used to have before I came on board about being a little bit more cooperative with law enforcement when there is a threat to a specific individual that law enforcement is trying to prevent, and where there is information that we could provide that might help make it so that there wasn't a loss of life or other violent physical harm. So that's the thinking. That was the thinking behind our policy.
But now that you've come in, you've decided it's actually better to let the physical harm happen more quickly while somebody goes off and gets the warrant?
We're in the process of reassessing our policy, and also trying to have a little bit of a better understanding of what exactly is being asked by law enforcement and what type of proof that they would have, and the types of searches that would be reasonable in those situations and the ones that would not be reasonable in those situations.
Such placative words.
It really.
Are they working?
I'm impressed. Yeah. So let me just make sure I get this straight, because we'd want to make sure if we publish anything, we haven't decided yet whether it's a worthwhile news story. But the only way you figure that out is conversations like this one. So, in the old world at Faceplant, before you fired SG, the thought was that as soon as you got a photograph like this with a threatening note like that, you would immediately search your databases and see if you could be cooperative. Why would you be tempted to move away from that if in fact a life is at stake here? If I told you I had a photograph of, say, a terror organization issuing a threat, and we thought a terror attack was imminent, would you wait for a warrant as well?
Again, I think this, not talking about this particular example, but these types of questions are among the hardest that we deal with at Faceplant. What a great company name we've got. Hope we've trademarked it far and wide. There's some of the most important ones we deal with at Faceplant, and some of the hardest, because on the one hand, if you could know somehow that the police organization was not just going on a fishing expedition, actually didn't have the time to go get a warrant, actually had credible evidence that would allow us to just get the perpetrator of this action, then that might be something that you would want to turn over. But so many times you don't know that. And so much of that determination is based on the particular facts of a particular case and the relationship with the law enforcement agency that is doing the asking.
So this picture could be a fake. It could have been created by parents in a divorce case. It could be something that is really not threatening at all. And so you'd want the warrant so at least you had top cover before you did your search.
Well, we'd want the warrant because courts are the right place to make determinations like these, to figure out whether it's the right thing to do to give up information or not.
You want the warrant, but it sounds like the way you've described the terms of service, you've written it so you don't need the warrant.
That is definitely right. We've written the terms of service so that if we were sued, and again, this wouldn't be something that would be in the David conversation. This is the all-seeing narrator
put
conversation.
David on hold.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm used to that.
But we've written the terms of service as a protection against class actions with respect to information that we've turned over when we were wrong.
Now, it turns out our leaker wasn't just shampooing their cat. they were impatient. The New York Times hasn't yet published anything because it's doing diligence. So it's also sending this leak off to the Electric Frontier Association. Cindy, or Alex, you can decide among you which wants to take it. But I think, Cindy, maybe you're the right person to ask, how unusual is this? Are you at a meh on this as David was at first?
Well, we tend to not take information like this because our role is a little different. We tend to try to help people get to other people who might want to make use of it, and then we talk about the policy implications and the legal implications. I would be concerned about the request for a system-wide search for a piece of content, especially based on really conclusory assertions about what's actually going on here. I think that this is exactly the kind of situation where you want a judge to actually evaluate whether there is a sufficient basis to really do this kind of system-wide search.
But this is the kind of thing for which you think, if there's time at least, a warrant could issue? That a warrant could issue that says to Faceplant, I hereby order you to perform this search and return all information about accounts that possess this image?
I don't think so. It depends on what the other stuff is that the police letter says, well, we have reason to believe the only person who would ever have this is this person, and we know lots of it. So depending on those other facts, I've seen such orders. I think they're inappropriate. But you could also imagine a smaller order that would, say, identify a user who is somebody who's already been identified as a potential suspect, and then the search is much more narrow.
Yeah, it turns out the image came from Pluto Mail, really hard to track down. They're using Tor and all these other things I've heard rumor of. So all they've got is the image, but they think that it might be, they're hoping they might find something in Faceplant, and if they don't, they can't. I just can't tell if what you're saying is they need a warrant, and second, they can't have a warrant.
I think they need to try for a warrant in this situation, and whether they get one or not will depend on facts that are not in the circle that we have yet right now. And the question to me is, what else do the cops know? And if the cops know enough more to get a warrant, then they should get a warrant. I think the mere issuance of this is probably not sufficient.
But
Certainly
if there have been
not.
like threatening calls and other things that are hard to trace, enough to raise the gravity of it, you'd be ready to do the system-wide search.
Well, I wouldn't be the person who did it.
Yes,
but
you'd be ready to bless the system-wide search. It would not be I forget my acronym now, EFA, blast to all members, a call to arms over such a thing.
Again, I think that you could imagine a scenario in which you could do a broader search, a somewhat broad search. I think a system-wide search would be a line I wouldn't want to say was ever okay in this instance. I think you can always narrow it more, and if you can, you need to, and that's what I would hope the judge would make them do.
I wonder if we should turn to law enforcement. Matt, fresh off your work for the federal government, you found a cushy landing spot at the Ames County Police Department. Right. Tell us about this warrant.
So it is interesting. So yes, if I were advising the Ames County Police Department, I was a prosecutor for 10 years as well. So I did, in a sense, advise, although pre sort of these opportunities. But so I kind of agree with Cindy. If I was talking to the police department, I'd say, Chief, look, what else? We need to know more, if we can, about this. Who has a potential motive to hurt this child? Talk to the parents. Talk to the others in the photo, friends. I mean, develop as much as we can. Let's see if we can go back to Faceplant with a request that's based on, we would check to see if individuals in that circle of suspicion have accounts, sort of a metadata.
You want to start
question.
with people and search them rather than start with no one and search everything.
That's right. So as the more targeted we can make it, the better.
Yes.
So I know, well, go ahead. So you're going to tell me I don't get anything more specific, right?
No, I feel a certain resistance to this hypothetical. It is, I think, I forget, Bruce, the 4 horse people of the apocalypse. One of them is child protection, is it not?
Pornography.
Yeah, so it has a little bit of a tired feel to it, perhaps, to the libertarians in the room. So let me just rip from the headlines for a moment something that just came out this week. This is from the real world. Hackers steal photos from Plastic Surgeon to the Stars, and they claim the trove includes the royal family of Britain. It's a group called the Dark Overlord and has highly personal before and after photos from plastic surgery. And the plastic surgery firm agrees that the photos have been completely compromised and somebody stole them. This is just from the news story. We're going to pitch it all up for everyone to nab, the entire patient list with corresponding photos. The world has never seen a medical dump of a plastic surgeon to such degree. I don't think we've ever seen one to any degree, but maybe I'm not reading the right sites. The Dark Overlord told the Daily Beast last week. Can I just say that is perhaps a sign of the apocalypse, that the Dark Overlord is talking to the Daily Beast, and we're like, oh, yes, of course. The images do not appear to be publicly available yet, however, and it's unclear whether the group will follow through on their threat. Here is a narrow window of time. This is a very real situation. This is not a case of the Four Horse people. This is not child protection. What is at stake is just, I guess, dignity, respect, privacy. But these photos, if you've got them in your FacePlan account, you're not supposed to have them, right? There's no way they're supposed to be there. They are highly sensitive, the most highly sensitive, and therefore often the most protected by various laws, medical records that the Dark Overlord has seized. Cindy, is this a case in which, are there facts not in the circle? Are you prepared to do this kind of, to bless the kind of search we're talking about, where we're just going to cast a net because the time is ticking before they release this stuff? Anybody that's got these photos has no business having them.
No, I still think you have to do the work to try to figure out who you're looking for and why and where. And I think doing a mass, general search, as it were,
yes,
for even these would be too far. I still think, first of all, you can get a warrant, or there are emergency exceptions where you go back later and get a warrant. I just don't think that the legal process is a barrier here, and it provides an important check. I mean, I appreciate the Daily
yes.
Beast, but a news story is not alone, should not alone
yes.
be a basis of a mass search of everybody's content.
Fair enough. Let's see. Daphna, would you mind being our magistrate for the purpose of considering the warrant that everybody wants? And once they all get the warrant, everybody breathes a sigh of relief. The warrant is here. The warrant is here. We are all blessed. What do you need to know from Matt to consider whether to grant this warrant?
Matt, tell me what you have.
Well, going back to the child scenario.
No, we're
stick
talking
with
this one now.
Okay.
And make it the best you can, the
Yeah.
strongest possible application. Bring in new facts if you need them.
Okay, so what we have is a news story that we've seen indicating clear evidence that a rogue hacker group has stolen the most sensitive information, medical records of individuals, and has threatened to put those into the public domain. We know that Faceplant is one of the key companies where we might likely find these documents. They are billions of users around the world. They themselves don't prohibit this by their own terms of service. In fact, they have their own processes for looking across content on their site to target us with ads. So they do this routinely. So what we're simply asking for here is to have Faceplant do a minimal check of these existing photos to see if we can find any that match in order to advance our investigation.
Well, first of all, do you have any reason to think that these photos exist on Faceplant? And second of all, can you give me something more particularized that I can get behind in terms of the search that you'd like to run as an initial matter?
So what we have are from some of the victims. These are obviously confidential, and I can show them to you in camera, Your Honor. But they are the photos, a number of the photos that we believe were stolen. These are from the actual patients, and we have reason to believe that these are actual photos. So what we're simply asking is that Faceplant do a search across their platform for these 3 photos as exemplars.
And why Faceplant?
Faceplant is the dominant use. I mean, as I mentioned, there are 2 billion users of Faceplant around the world.
It's a small platform, but there are those who love it.
We also are considering this for 1 or 2 other providers, but at this point, this is where we think we'd like to start this process.
And can you narrow the search request in any way?
Well, we would be happy to work with the general counsel at Faceplant to come up with a technologically available means to do this that imposes really no burden on them, really consistent with how they currently conduct their own business for their own advertising purposes. So we're happy to work with Faceplant to come up with a mutually agreeable means to do this.
And what you're telling me is consistent with the terms of service. You could do the search. You don't actually need the warrant, but you're coming to me for an extra layer of protection.
Yeah, I think out of an abundance of caution, that's the appropriate course, at least at this stage. It's obvious that Faceplant could do this without a warrant. This is not necessarily protected under the Fourth Amendment, given the terms of service that all the users of Faceplant have already agreed to, so they have no reasonable expectation of privacy at this stage, as far as we're aware, given what our understanding is of the terms of service.
And would there be privacy considerations for third-party users?
Sure. We're sensitive to, in the government, the privacy implications of this. This is not without privacy concerns. So we'd work closely with Faceplant to mitigate any third-party considerations.
And so basically what you're telling me is that there's documents that you believe were stolen that could exist anywhere, and you want to be able to search this company because it's one of the companies that might have them because they do a lot of business.
Yes, because it's because of the expansive and ubiquitous nature of the platform, we think it's quite likely that this is, and we can get an expert here to explain how broadly Faceplant is present around the world.
So the Bruce signal just went
so
up
we want
from
Bruce
Matt
to help, right?
Bruce Schneider, do you want to help on the technical part? In fact, Matt has asked you to be a technical friend to the prosecutor here, as he wants to make sure he's doing this warrant application to Daphne right.
I think it's clear that Faceplant does these kind of searches all the time. Maybe, we will assume they're searching for blue-shirted children for LL Bean and before and after plastic surgery photos for some mother luxury goods advertiser. So technically, this is not a big ask. This is not the same as asking Apple to reverse engineer their iPhone. This is just something they do for advertisers.
You said they're looking for blue-shirted children, which indicates a susceptibility to LL Bean advertising. That's the idea?
That's
LL Bean might be, for anybody with lots of pictures of blue-shirted kids, sell them the boots.
Or something like that.
Yeah,
but searching their content broadly,
Yes.
looking for either specific things or general things, is Faceplant's business model. Right? That is how they make money. So what we are asking is nothing technically difficult. Their terms of service permits that. You're in a sense just saying, do us a favor, do something you're already allowed to do. I mean, we could discuss whether that is morally correct or whether the law should change, but as written, there's no reason in the world why Faceplant can't just say yes because they're being nice. I don't actually even think it's much of a news story, except that maybe to illustrate that Congress needs to fix this. So I think we're good asking. I think getting the warrant's certainly a nice check, but I don't think.
And one of the reasons to get the warrant is you don't need the warrant.
I mean, I think what Matt said, abundance of caution. That if we can get it, it sort of makes everybody happier.
And
But
how
I don't
about
think it's
Daphne's
necessary.
concern about any third-party privacy? Can you put her at ease on that?
No, I can't. But you're already not at ease because you're a Faceplant user. So the additional, I don't think the additional abuse is considerable. I mean, these Faceplant users already have everything they do eavesdropped on and searched in an offer to sell them stuff.
And we'd be happy to turn over any of the returns from this search to Judge Daphne for her independent review before we get it. So we'd be happy to put her in that position.
Sounds like we're about to move a car off this lot. Yes, Daphne?
Yeah, and I think following what a number of magistrate judges are doing, even though it's not clearly within the framework that they usually operate, there's a lot of minimization procedures and things like that that magistrates will impose in a context like this, kind of creating law to try to make the rules fit better this new circumstance.
But now Andrew is looking a little dyspeptic, so I want to give him a moment to express his thoughts. But tell me what role you'd like to play here, Andrew.
Oh, I thought that's your job. Are you supposed to tell me what my role is?
Well, if you can tell me a little bit about how you're about to emote,
So here's I don't know. I'm sharing an office with Alex. So here's the
for 8 years.
Here's the thing that's puzzling me a little bit, though, about the conversation so far is that Faceplant has at least 3 different clusters of services that it offers. And it seems to me that the expectation of privacy around the different services is different for Fourth Amendment purposes and certainly different for user expectations. And my guess is that there's going to be policies, terms of use that have been written that are sensitive to them. So one is the public post, public defined as all the people that are members of Faceplant. And so for people that post something publicly, there's absolutely no expectation that it would not be associated back to you.
But unfortunately, as we just take it step by step, for this kind of search, that's unlikely to yield anything. We're looking for documents that haven't yet gone public.
Exactly right.
Okay.
So then let me go to the other side. So then the other side is one-to-one communication. So Faceplant Messenger allows one person to communicate with one person. And by the way, there's maybe even a fourth service here, which is personal data storage. So if I go all the way out, I may have, because you said there was a Dropbox-like service, so I may have a storage folder where I can place documents that are exclusively accessible by me.
Yes.
And it may well be that Faceplant has said that they treat those as private and have strong protections, absolute warrant requirements, a minimal zone of flexibility to operate outside the bounds of legal compulsion.
Well, let's just straighten this out real quick between the 2 roommates here now, because Alex, previously you were saying you're going to try to draft the impenetrable terms of service to be as anti-class action suit as possible and therefore to retain maximum flexibility. But I hear Andrew saying he'd want to see a company, and it's not implausible to expect.
By the way, if I get to pick my role, I'm CEO and founder of Faceplant. Okay, I'm about to be one of the wealthiest people in the world as soon as we can IPO. So we just have to get through this little crisis here and move on to the public market.
But for that, you're saying you would disagree with Alex and want to have stated protections.
Well, so in other words, so again, if I'm thinking about this from the business perspective, my goal is to build a service that gets the maximum number of users that are using it the maximum amount of time to drive the maximum amount of advertising and related revenues. And so that means I need
public safety does not play into that at all.
No, it does. No, of course. Okay. No, actually, it really does. In fact, but for the different flavors of product, I have to have different considerations. So if I want people to use a Dropbox-like upload service, I have to signal to the world that I'm going to protect it as a matter of technical competence and also as a matter of policy protection, that I will absolutely do everything in my power to protect those files. And basically, not to say that I will never cooperate with law enforcement, just that I will put law enforcement through the paces of complying with whatever warrant system might apply. But now, by the way, Faceplant is a global company, and we should talk for a second about what that means. But let me first just say that on the other hand, there's the fully public stuff. There, the zone of public dialogue and discourse that happens on the platform, I very much want to be civil. I want it to be friendly. I want to fight against trolling, hate speech, racism, all the other bad things that can happen. And so I will aggressively cooperate with law enforcement. I will affirmatively police it. I will look for images that I can associate with hate speech. I will voluntarily turn them over to law enforcement. I'll write terms of service that allow me to do that. Just to point out, though, what the really hard zone here is, I think the really hard zone for my company is that we also have this set of services which are group communications, where I can define the cohort that I want to communicate with. So that could be like an open system, like a subreddit of 10,000 people that are all exchanging information. It might be just a small group of 10 people that are going to plan a crime, that are going to trade child pornographic images, child sex abuse imagery, or other nefarious sort of activities. So what's hard for me, and the assignment that I've given to Alex that's tricky here, is in that gray zone, we are the only people that can see what's going on in there if we choose to. And so a general search, I think, is kind of useless over here. Also useless over here because we can get into, the sort of like Dropbox type service requires a lot of particularized detail because it's going to have to penetrate my policies requiring a warrant. But in the middle, in these kind of like group communication zones, that's actually where a generalized search could turn up the most valuable information. A general search across the system looking for, like a fingerprinted image.
Because one of those groups might be the Dark Overlord's chat room.
Correct, exactly right. And that's where you find sort of the pressure. Now, as a business matter, the question is, if I'm just thinking about this, from the user perspective, how much protection do I need to make that be an appealing product for the long term? Like, do I need to be more aggressive and treat it more like a semi-public space because the risk of harassment, hate speech, and all those other things is high? Or is that more like just a slightly enlarged version of one-to-one communications that I want to have a lot of protection for so that people will feel comfortable chatting with each other across the platform?
Yep. What sounded like before your intervention, we were on the cusp of granting the warrant. We hadn't yet specified which of the 3 zones we were searching, so I think it was safe to say we were thinking all of them. You were going to say something more?
Just the weird thing that the magistrate didn't consider was whether there's any log evidence or anything else that indicates that the images have been stolen. Like even the very first chain of a crime existing, I would expect the magistrate to be curious about whether there's anything behind the Daily Beast or just a bragging anonymous account.
Yeah, in this case, actually, if you read the story, it turns out the surgery acknowledges that they had a breach.
Again, the surgery may be competent to read its server logs or not. They may have just been free. I would want to see some hard evidence.
I'm not relying on the Daily Beast story. I'm relying on the materials I was shown.
That Matt was kindly sharing.
But I do think that there's, the idea that there's material stolen, and so if you think it might be in a location that has billion users, billion data, that's a particularized showing for a warrant is obviously not the way that the traditional framework operates, and why the warrant process is not really the right process to get at this.
Oh, wait, so you're maybe not ready to grant this warrant.
So I have real concerns here.
Yeah, that's also why I would fight a warrant if it was issued under these circumstances on behalf of the company, because it can't be that something goes missing in the world, and as a result, we've got to search our servers.
And I'd amicus in support of the company.
And second
David,
can't be
do we
the
have
world.
a news story yet?
Well, we've got a more interesting news story about the policy than about the issues. So the material the Dark Overlord has about the actual photographs of the plastic surgery are probably a news story for someone. They're probably not a news story for me, okay? I can think of some supermarket tabloids that might like them, and
Oh yeah, no, I was asking more about the conflict here.
Yeah,
yes.
The conflict here is really interesting because here I find the fascinating policy story to be that, first of all, people have surrendered basically all of their privacy rights here across all this from the moment they signed up with a set of terms of service that they never read.
That's true.
Okay, and then you have the companies going off trying to get Judge Daphne over here to give them cover for something they clearly could go do all by themselves if they just wanted to, and could do without telling any of us. And for some reason or another, it's a more compelling reason to go do searches so they can get that LL Bean ad in the right place than it is to go find someone's stolen plastic surgery pictures or find a child who might be under threat.
Wow, that maybe puts
That's
it back
a story.
to Cindy or Alex. Cindy's ready to write the amicus brief. Alex, are you going to join with an amicus brief of your own?
Yeah, and can I frame it? So I think there are 2 sets of questions, and the first set of questions is the one that Andrew was starting to help answer, and that Bruce had talked about, which is what the government or the Ames County Police Department trying to get a warrant for a search within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment, which turns on some of the factors that we've been discussing, whether people expect privacy in each of these 3 zones. I think that's the first question. I'm not as maybe cynical as Bruce, in terms of the fact that some people accept some scanning of their email content or their one-to-one messaging on this service, that they've sacrificed their privacy for Fourth Amendment purposes. I think that would undo privacy across most of the internet right now. But that's the debate one. What bucket do each of these 3 services fall in, a search or not a search? And if they're not a search, then you don't need a warrant, and we're fine. If they are a search, then you have 3 options. Because they're unquestionably, in this context, would be a general search, which is generally not allowed by the Fourth Amendment. In the same way that if my sensitive information over here went missing in Cambridge, the police probably couldn't get a warrant that would allow them to search every house in Cambridge for it. The same would apply to these one-to-one communications or any other protected space within Faceplant's product. So you have 3 options. One, you apply that doctrine to the digital age and say no general searches in the digital age. 2, you discard that doctrine and say we do have general searches in the digital age, but if we do that, you have to accept that that's going to apply whether what's being stolen is sensitive medical photos or something totally trivial. Or maybe it's just evidence of jaywalking that happens to be on FacePlan service, but the police have probable cause to believe jaywalking occurred.
This is a classic ACLU trademarked slippery slope.
Well, but then option 3.
Okay.
Because I've thought about this hypothetical since the first time you posed it to me. Option 3 is you could say, as a general matter, no general searches of this sort. But the Fourth Amendment has always had an exigent circumstances exception. And maybe we'll allow the government to take advantage of that exception for the purpose of a general search in very narrowly defined circumstances. I would have concerns even about that because once you create the ticking time bomb authority, everything starts to look like a ticking time bomb. Because I'm quite sure that the next hypothetical is not going to be these images, but a terrorist attack.
We'll be taking a break shortly while I rework my PowerPoint.
But that's the framework that I would use to analyze it. And I think so far we've really just focused on 1 and 2. Is it a general search and we shouldn't have it or we should? If we're going to do it, I'd prefer it be in bucket 3, although I'm not sure as between bucket 1 and 3, don't do it or exit
But Alex,
circumstances.
I hear you then saying you're ready to negotiate, that you're nervous, you're a little bit anxious about it, but that you're not prepared to say no general searches ever.
I don't know. Because I suspect you could come up with a ticking time bomb scenario, the same sort that are prevalent in many other human rights debates. And my instinct would be to resist making policy on the basis of ticking time bomb scenarios.
But does this qualify?
No, I don't think so.
Not at all.
No.
And why not? Because it's not literally threatening physical harm? What interest are you vindicating and for whom by not allowing a search for these images in zones 2 and 3 that Andrew described, which would be to say the Dropbox zone and the closed group chat zone? Whose interests are being vindicated?
The interests of the millions of people who rely on FacePlant to secure their private information.
Who do or don't have these photos?
Who don't.
Who don't have the photos.
Yeah.
Because their interests, in your view, are infringed when a touch is made on their folder and nothing is found and the robot moves along. They have been harmed.
In the same way that they would if a police officer went through 10,000 houses
in the same
Cambridge.
way.
Yeah.
You'd say touching that folder to see if a hash matches is the same as a police officer coming to our doors and saying, don't mind me, I'm just going to go through every drawer of your house looking for photos, and if I don't find anything, you're cool.
Well, we can make it a robot to make it more analogous, but a robot doing the same thing in the physical world.
Bruce?
So again, putting my advising of the prosecution hat on.
I want him on my side again.
This is precisely what the NSA says, that in fact, if we have a computer doing this and they touch every photo and return no information if a match is not made, that this is not a search, and that is their doctrine. Now, we could argue about it, but as long as it's their doctrine, I think you go with it. And you say that this is not a search, that because no human being looks through anybody's drawers, looks through anybody's material, that there's no, because it only returns matches, that it's not a general search. And you
So
try that on the judge.
I'd love to hear Cindy get one more at bat, then Matt gets one last thing, and Daphne will render her decision on the warrant.
Well, I mean, if that were the rule, then I guess, at the time of the framers, it's okay if the cops come through your house and it only counts as a search if they find something. And right now, we store all of our a huge amount of sensitive information in these digital worlds, and it can be used against us. And I think that that's an extremely dangerous rule. Perhaps one of the people who has these photographs is actually somebody who's doing a reveal about this plastic surgeon and how bad they do. We don't know from these facts.
In which case, I presume if it were found and then law enforcement got in touch with them, they would tell their story, and that would be that.
I don't think that's actually how it would work, honestly.
They would not pass go. They would go directly to jail.
Well, I think it would be a tough place for them to be. I just think that at this particular point in time, the assumption that all of the patients want this information off and that nobody could ever use it for anything good, it could only be used to violate privacy, is one of the things that we don't know. And it's part of why we don't like general searches, is because from the beginning, we don't necessarily know that just because this information is sitting in somebody's file that means that they're the bad guy. And so I guess I would say, in addition to what Alex says, it's just all the rest of us can never put anything in our digital lives that wouldn't be subject to a search, the content of which and the contours of which we are never going to know. And in the national security context, that becomes much more acute. That's not only because of the time that the Eye of Sauron passes over us. It comes from the times that it actually identifies us as well.
All right, so back to our representative from Barad-dûr, Matt Olson, Eye of Sauron. I presume at some point you will be willing to allow the fact that the search happened to be released. That
Yes.
this was a leak of that request and it being
Yes.
granted. But I guess investigatively you might keep it quiet for a bit, but after it's run, you'd let the public know that it at least happened?
Sure, that's the nature of search warrants. They eventually become public, and we might
At least if there's a prosecution. Do they
well,
become
even
public if there
before,
isn't?
but yes, before they would be held under seal for some period of time, but they would eventually be disclosed. In fact, it would be obviously be disclosed to the company, and the company could disclose it. The company's not under any obligation not to disclose the fact that there was a search in a general criminal search, as opposed to a national security search. So, but I'm trying to stay in the game. I mean, I get the issues here. I mean, I get that. My conversations with colleagues in my office with Bruce are, look, this is not the best test case for this, that, celebrities who've gotten plastic surgery compared to a national security or a terrorism event. And this is not a case where looking at people's files across this broad platform has no privacy implications. I think it certainly does. It's just, we're in a different ball game because of the nature of the technology. Both the nature of the collection, but also what we can do to search quickly, and what the company itself does. So I'm back before the judge trying to stay in the game, which is to say, Judge, we're perfectly willing to work closely with Faceplant's team to craft an order for you to consider that would be narrow, would start at the outer edges in the first basket, moving into the second basket where people have already communicated with each other at some level. So they're not holding this personally to themselves. So we'll craft it to avoid going into any of the places where there's a strong expectation of privacy or an expectation of privacy among the communicants. And then we are also willing then to have any responsive documents, any of the photos that show up, go just to you as the judge to review, to minimize any impact on any third parties. That seems like a reasonable approach here that can accommodate the competing interests.
So I look forward to that order and to see how it's been narrowed and particularized, because one thing to emphasize is if these are Fourth Amendment protected contexts, giving the warrant on the front end makes it harder to think about reasonableness on the back end. So what I want to see is, how do we narrow this warrant so that I'm not in the context of, we think there's documents somewhere in the city of New York, and therefore we're going to look at every house. Give me something to hang on to that makes this feel a bit different.
Last question before we move on. Andrew had raised the international dimension of things. Matt, are you wanting to restrict this only to U.S. jurisdiction, or should it be a worldwide search?
Yeah, so I'm just a police department lawyer, so I don't even really understand. I barely understand the implications of
You're
beyond,
just a country police department
beyond my
lawyer.
little police department. Right now, we're talking, worldwide.
What do you want in your heart?
So
tell me what you want in your heart.
I want to win this case, right? That's
so you want to search the world.
I do. I want. I definitely Faceplant's. If I'm going down this path, Faceplant's an American company based in the United States. They have
the idea that only if it's an American criminal is it found, but the Canadians walk free seems crazy, right?
Yeah, that does not make sense to me, and I think it's appropriate to search all the available servers where this information may be stored.
Daphne, you're okay with that?
Well, are you asking me if I will give a global search warrant?
Right.
Well, I guess it's a local search warrant to Faceplant to search everything it has, which may turn out to be global.
So now we're getting into a domain that there's going to be a court decision on soon, but probably the Stored Communications Act needs to be considered and how it applies extraterritorially. And I imagine I'm going to get a fair bit of briefing on this issue from
You're
my
just a country magistrate. Got it.
But also Matt had said that he was happy to have notice go out to all the users. So we can tell all our users all over the world that if they have a problem with this, they can come to Daphne's courtroom.
Well, I do think that's your call. I do think that's your prerogative to inform your users in a criminal search warrant at some point. To inform them.
With a note to talk to Daphne, it does seem like a distributed denial of justice attack. But,
I'm still curious. I still don't know where we get to the, hey, something bad happened. There's an Ames. I don't understand why we're in Ames, like why the Ames people care. I think if this got reported to Ames, they would say, great, that goes in the garbage. Thank you for sending it to us, right? Like,
well, remember, we had both the plastic surgery and we had the original harm to a child. It's just we didn't seem to be getting as much traction with harm to a child as we did with the plastic surgery.
The same. I mean, I've dealt with people who had real problems with stuff online, and they go to their local police department with the equivalent of a picture of a kid. Yes. And don't know who the kid is, don't know where it is, don't have any clue. The police department says, we can't help you.
Yes.
We're not going to do anything.
Got it.
Well, that's not very helpful. So they can, because when the kid situation, that does seem to me you would start with your local jurisdiction there. I think that's an appropriate place for the police department to say, what can we do here?
That partly breaks our hypothetical, right? If it's just a picture that got sent, we don't know who the kid is.
But no. The picture was sent to the parents in the hypothetical.
Yes.
The picture was sent to the parents.
The parents of the kid.
And the parents,
live
live
go to their local.
in,
we don't know who the kid is.
In Ames, Iowa, wherever we are.
Yeah, we do.
And we might do some police work about who might have a gripe or a
But
reason.
you would like to see people who might have a gripe try to get the threshold of a warrant and then, as Lenny says in Law & Order, turn it. Go into their houses and look for everything, rather than this much more modest kind of just sift the topsoil a little bit of everybody.
I don't know, and this is partly to Alex's point and others about the things that that the search but not found users, that interest is not just in the searching, it's in this rule that anytime anything happens, we're going to toss everything that is in these containers and look through it. And I don't know how that was a rule that was abhorrent to the founders for a reason.
Well, we have leak number 2, and I don't even know if David ended up writing a story. He probably did.
Probably not about the content, but about the policy debate inside Faceplant. That might be pretty interesting, yeah. We could well have gotten a story on that, but these would just be sort of examples used to illustrate the problem inside Faceplant as they try to struggle with this issue.
Got it. All right, well, next week your telex machine rattles with an incoming telex from our leaker, and it regards this. This is an app used principally in China, very few overseas users outside of China, and very few United States users. It's a video chat app, and this leaker discloses to you what appears to be slide number 62 of 714 of a top secret, ultra mega top secret PowerPoint deck from the Special Security Agency, motto, no bit left unflipped. And it appears to be for internal use. It's their update on counter-terrorist surveillance, current efforts, secret chat. That's the app that we were just looking at. And it appears to depict that the U.S. Special Security Agency has managed with a smiley face to compromise the secret chat servers. And they are able to do facial recognition so that if they're looking for that terrorist suspect, dare I say, I want to be true to Alex's expectations, they can track down where that person might be on the basis of if that person happens to be using secret chat. And that's the way the app works. So David, if you are able to, at least to some satisfaction, authenticate that this is an actual slide from the actual Special Security Agency, where are you between meh and 10?
So now we're getting up in the 6, 7, 8s here. And a couple of questions so that I understand this. I assume that though this was a Chinese user, the Special Security Agency is a U.S. agency.
Correct,
here?
it is.
Right. So because we're expecting that the Chinese services all do this as a matter of routine.
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's a U.S. agency.
Right. And so what we're learning here is that the U.S. agency has gotten in between the servers of U.S. companies or U.S.-based companies? Or
No,
US
Secret Chat appears to be an app run out of China.
Run out of China.
Yeah.
So they've gotten into a foreign service,
Correct.
right? For which the U.S. agency, the Special Security Agency, since it's foreign, their job in the world is to go break into foreign systems.
Yes.
They're probably acting legally. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a news story, but there isn't necessarily a legal issue here of whether the Special Security Agency can legally break into a foreign network.
In which case, what makes it newsworthy to you?
Well, it may be newsworthy for a couple of reasons. First of all, we spend an enormous amount of time in the United States being outraged when foreign services come in and break into our networks. When the Chinese came into the Office of Personnel Management and cleared out with 21.5 million security clearance files, including a lot of people on this panel.
Good times, we say.
By the way, Alex, you missed line 43 on the bottom of the form. You might want to go back. Okay. But when they did that, we show great outrage. So there could be an interesting story in the fact
There's a both sidesism story.
There's a both sidesism story. Secondly,
is it your concern at all that it might blow a good functional operation by
it could
the
be.
US government?
I'm getting to that in just a moment. Okay. So the second is it could tell us a little bit about what the Special Security Agency's capabilities are inside China. So that might be good as an interesting story. But before I ran the story, I would almost certainly go to the Special Security Agency and say, we have a document here, looks almost as genuine as the documents that came out of, say, Edward Snowden's material. Okay. In fact, we had documents out of Edward Snowden's material about U.S. operations inside China to get inside Huawei's servers, right? And we ran that story. Okay. And so we're thinking about writing something along the lines here, and it's really time to sit down and have that discussion about what the risks of that story would be and whether or not we would be interrupting an ongoing operation.
So the Special Security Agency has just received your call and heard that, and they have invoked a little-known clause to pull Matt out of his cozy retirement at the Ames County Police Department back to a general counsel position of the Special Security Agency. Matt, what's your conversation with David? Are you going to take his call?
Yeah, I would take the call. And I would obviously, I would first realize
hear
it's
the
David.
call.
So here's the call. So, hey, David, good to talk to you again. Yeah. Not really.
And we just wanted for the record that Matt and I have never had such conversations before.
That's right.
Okay?
So what's going on?
So, Matt, remember Snowden? How could you forget him?
I start shaking.
So remember when Snowden happened, you said this was the worst possible leak of all these documents that could go on. But since Snowden's happened, we've had more leaks. We've had leaks that took place with a group called Shadow Brokers, which started publishing various stuff. And now we've had another set of leaks, not entirely clear where it's coming from, but we've got some documents that seem to indicate that you're inside Chinese servers. So I've got a couple of concerns here first. One is we believe this document to be authentic. If it's not, that's important for us and for you to know beforehand. And secondly, we'd want to know, before we made our decision whether to publish, whether publishing would harm an ongoing intelligence operation so that we can make an appropriate decision.
And so in going through my mind is one that David, that's a sincere point. That's not just a something he has to say, that we care about intelligence, equities and national security, that's a genuine comment, and that there is an opportunity here for me to talk to, I obviously would round up folks in the agency and have a broader conversation.
But Matt would know that we have withheld stories before. We delayed them In some cases, we've delayed them for several years.
And that I also know David wants to get this right. So one question is this real? So David, let's. So this sounds like something that we need to be concerned about from what you've told me. I think it would be helpful if we could meet. If I could see what you have, I think I need to understand what it is that you have. If you would share that with me and my team, and I think we would take it from there one step at a time. Obviously, I'm not going to just go to DEF CON and say, oh, this can never get out because.
Are you prepared to confirm it? Are you allowed under the law to confirm it?
I think that I would not confirm it to David. I would want to. I would see it and be able to make an argument then about what the implications are of releasing.
But you'd never be able to say, I can confirm this.
I don't know about that. I don't know if we would come close. I mean, David, you may have more experience with in what cases there's been a confirmation. But I think just by virtue of how we responded, there would be an implicit perhaps confirmation.
If it's serious enough, I know that Matt has the authority to go up through the Director of National Intelligence, National Security Advisor, even the President, to get at least an authorization to have a conversation with me without putting Matt at the liability that he's revealing national security information just by having the conversation.
Yes. Right.
Now let me turn back for a moment to Cindy and Alex. If you're catching wind of this, maybe from David, who's gathering more background on the story, maybe not, is this a civil liberties concern for you guys?
Yes. Sure. I mean, there are innocent people in China who would like to be able to have a private conversation. This is mass surveillance of lots and lots of innocent people in China, and then subjecting, there's facial recognition, so there's content that's being taken and done it, and then it looks like it's just metadata they're using to match the terrorist database. But still, this is massive. Looks like they're attempting to surveil all of the users of this service on the off chance that some of them might be people who they're interested in.
And is this a basis for a lawsuit?
I don't see standing so far for a lawsuit in the United States, but at the Electronic Freedom Foundation, or whatever you called us, we don't just care about Americans. We care about building a digital world where people feel safe to be able to talk to each other without, an kind of invisible third person or fourth or fifth listening in on the conversation on the off chance that they might be doing something wrong. So, my international team would definitely be very interested in this, even if my domestic lawyers would not, I think at this point, have the basis for an American lawsuit.
Imagine that it further leaks, slide number 97. There's a picture of somebody using the app who appears to be in front of the Statue of Liberty, and they do somewhat drolly observe, we've experienced some challenges involving incidental collection of data corresponding to U.S. persons. Our team is hard at work improving our filtering and minimization protocols. Anything lawsuit worthy now? Or?
Well, I'd like to know who that guy is, because I'd have a conversation with them about
He's everywhere.
needing counsel.
That guy.
Yeah, certainly you're in the U.S. now, so presumably there are U.S. persons who are being subjected to the facial recognition, unless that guy's, he might not be an American. And none of those people might be Americans, but I think that we would certainly think that there are U.S. persons that are going to be affected.
And they might not even be U.S. persons, but they are on U.S. soil,
Correct.
Which might accord them certain protections. I don't know, Alex, is your litigation bug awakening?
Yeah, there's a possibility that especially if these, that individual is the one sending the communication and it ended up in this slide, that person would have standing to sue, to challenge what's going on. Although that, I think avoids the bigger and the harder question, which is the one that Cindy raised, which is that privacy is not just a domestic civil right; it is an international human right. The rules of privacy internationally are, unsettled at the moment, and there's a hard fight for what they should be. And that's where I still see this mostly in. But to the extent
Alex, is what you're asking for that basically the Special Security Agency just take a nap? Should it just cease its efforts overseas?
Definitely not. No, but to the one dividing line that international law might settle on is between targeted surveillance and mass surveillance. And I don't know whether we know enough about the program yet to say that this is mass surveillance. From the last slide, it looked as though that they were, decrypting everything. And if so, that's mass surveillance. If they're doing that, decryption with the intent and the actuality of targeting specific people, then I think it's a different question. But if the Special Security Agency is, sweeping in all the communications that it can, irrespective at the outset of whether they're communications between targets and not, between bad actors and not, then that raises the threat of mass surveillance and whether international human rights are consistent with that kind of surveillance.
Bruce, does this distinction sing to you?
It definitely is an important distinction. And this is certainly a mass surveillance system, that the entire database is being searched, there's pattern matching, and anything that is a match goes back, and it's either real or a false positive.
Are you with Alex in saying if you're the Special Security Agency, we need the equivalent kind of the particularization of a warrant before you should be cracking stuff overseas, because doing a mass search of everybody to try to grab something relevant is somehow a form of rights infringement that we shouldn't engage in?
I think it is. I mean, it's clear that this is allowed. This is allowed by current law. I don't think there's any challenge to the NSA. They're exceeding their authority anyway. And so this is much more a question of what should the authority be, and do we want to live in a world, as Cindy said, where even people outside the U.S. have this presumption of privacy in their conversations, or do live in a world where NSA can grab whatever they can because it happens to be outside the U.S.?
I would say that just a small addition to something that Bruce said. I mean, I think in an international human rights context, we look at whether a tool is necessary and proportionate. Those are the kind of magic words. And I think there is a very serious international legal analysis that says this kind of mass surveillance would never meet the proportionate wing, even if you've got the necessary wing. So I don't think it's clear that this is legal. It's certainly clear that the U.S. government's issued an executive order granting this authority to its things, but those are not the same thing, I think.
Andrew?
So if I'm still the CEO of Faceplant, what's interesting to me about this and troubling and feeds into the kind of conundrums that we're trying to unravel is that we're operating globally. We'd like to be able to compete in China. We would like very much there to be a rule of broad international recognition of minimization, because for the reasons that we were sort of alluding to earlier, for me to operate internationally and to maintain, to both merit and maintain the trust of users, I need to not only protect, Azerbaijani users from being wantonly searched by the U.S., but also by Russia and also by South Africa. I'm hiring sales organizations and putting engineers all over the planet in order to deliver services. I have to put data centers in many different jurisdictions in order to serve up content subjecting me to many jurisdictions. So I would like that very much. What's interesting about this case, though, is I wonder if does it change your thinking, Alex and Cindy, to know that the Chinese government is conducting real-time mass surveillance through secret chat 24/7, every single communication getting stored. Does that make it any more or less troubling for the NSA to do the same thing?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the answer can be they're doing it so we can do it too. That's a kind of least common denominator approach to human rights, and that's not one that I would endorse.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, the fact that they're doing it is a reason why we should actually pick a different course and one that actually protects people's rights. I don't.
Even if the expectation of privacy of the users themselves may be, gosh, everybody's watching everything.
Well, I think the expectation of privacy analysis is reaching a bit of its ending point in lots of places in the digital world, and this assumption, by the way, that by agreeing to the terms of service, which you never ever read, you've handed over your constitutional rights, is also one that we kind of slid by earlier, but that I would want to pause on. I don't think that you can contract away things, certainly not in the way that we think of contracts in the digital age. But so no, I think that I would not say that's the right.
So to just to put this in a nutshell, what's troubling for me then is to try to figure out whether I architect my services and policies around a subjective expectation of privacy or a normative rule about what privacy should be. And I'd rather do the latter, but there are lots of countries that force me to do the former.
Yeah, that's why we have to join together to try to raise the bar for everybody, right? I mean, that's our work, right? That's why I run a little nonprofit. Is, you know, if it were already done, then I could go do something else, which would be kind of fun. But like, I want
Ames
you
County
to join.
Police Department will have you.
You as the CEO, I want you to join with me because we want to build a world that we want to live in.
So, not to interrupt the kumbaya moment here, but Alex, wearing your deputy CTO hat, if it landed in your lap from a brand new president who, let us hypothesize, has thought about any of this not at all, and was like, give me a memo, I only deal in bullet points and pictures. Give me a 3 bullet point, 1 picture memo that tells me what the new policy should be, and I am very open to completely undoing whatever the prior policy was, even though I'm not sure what it is.
I mean, I think it's hard to divorce my personal feelings from the role of that you've put me in. And I don't. I think we are trying to move to a world where there is a sense of privacy, even though we have a number of different things working against it. Mm-hmm. And so I take Andrew's point to be a really good one, which is we should be trying to raise this bar across the world. And as far as the U.S. company's interest within the general in this general conversation, if most people don't think that they can put stuff through a U.S. company or, in this case, a Chinese company without giving it up to every single law enforcement agency around the globe, we're going to be in a position where 2 things are going to happen. Either we're going to move away from that model and move back towards a first-person storage, first-person trust model.
Freedom box. We literally have something in our house that...
Yep. Or we're going to move to a model where that opportunity that the Secret Service agency currently has to go after that particular box where there is an opportunity to look at the information in an unencrypted form goes away, because the only way that I can answer CEO Andrew as engineer at his company, how do I protect a particular user's communication, is to make it so that the company itself, Faceplant, doesn't have that access. And so I think we quickly move, and this is the point that I think Bruce raised earlier about this move away from a first person and a government needing to come at me or to compromise me in order to get my information, to all this stuff being done through intermediaries and going to Secret Chat to get everything. The only other thing I would raise is I also want to be talking about how the Special Security Agency compromised the box. And is that a compromise that I'm going to be reading about in the New York Times in 3 weeks, that actually that compromise was also picked up by a bunch of other intelligence agencies, and all the companies all over the world, including the White House, are having trouble with a breach because of the compromise.
That's how Dark Lord got the pictures.
Right at what the central news story is here, which is, how did this happen? Was it based on some kind of a flaw that the United States government may have found and stockpiled in its stockpile of cyber weapons? Did it happen from somebody outside who might have stolen part of that stockpile? That's all pretty interesting news stories, and that's part of what I would take up in my conversation with Matt.
Mm-hmm. And Bruce, I know you want to say something. I was just going to ask you quickly, from the tail end of Alex's observations, if somebody, an enlightened CEO like Andrew at Faceplant, is kind of feeling like he's wanting the system to be less open to general searches, so that when he's given the warrant, if he's given it, he can just do a shruggy and say, I can't make that happen, in part because he doesn't want every country around the world to demand that of him. Is it possible these days to architect global services so they are inured from these kinds of global searches, but still able to turn a profit from the kind of ubiquitous advertising that L.L. Bean wants?
So I'm gonna pull this apart, because we have 2 very different use cases here. That we have the Justice Department coming in and saying, do this search. And yes, the faceplant can architect their systems so they can't do that search. This is very different. This is the SSA breaking the encryption. And I'm now going to invoke the trope of technologists always look for legal solutions and lawyers look for technological solutions. That in fact, the NSA is happy with faceplant or whoever this Chinese company saying, we're going to have the tech solve this. Because the SSA is in the business of breaking security tech, and they're very good at it. So tech solutions that will have
Just a quick
flaws and
check-in.
vulnerabilities.
Matt, is the SSA okay? I assume the SSA is okay with doing what I've just described. This slide is not like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, generally, foreign intelligence collection around the world targeted in this way. I mean, I would argue potentially not. I wouldn't necessarily use the term mass surveillance. It's this is a company that there's a foreign intelligence reason to believe that there's information that's being collected through this company that is valuable.
But Bruce is saying if the law doesn't work, you've always
I mean,
got the
we
tech.
have this NSA collecting every phone call out of Bermuda. I mean, we have examples of this from the Snowden archives.
But I just wanted to ask Matt, would you see the SSA exploiting the same vulnerability if it knew about it to get at faceplants servers if faceplant's an American company on U.S. soil?
Different calculus with an American company.
Even if the servers are not in the United States. I'm thinking of what they did with Google.
Yep, generally different calculus.
Got it.
Generally,
it's very different. I mean, yes, we can architect faceplant systems so that faceplant can say, no, we can't do that. We have a lot more trouble architecting faceplant systems so that the SSA can't surreptitiously and maliciously go into faceplant servers and do it without their knowledge or consent.
And that's just a fact that it's just really hard to build good security.
It is really hard to build good security, and it is easier if you have the SSA's budget, which we have seen from Snowden's documents, that to defeat that security. And this is why I think legal and policy solutions are very important here, because I can't rely solely on the tech.
And David, just as you're about to maybe go to press with a story, one of your tech folks does discover some metadata that suggests that your leaker is in fact from Vladivostok. And I'm just wondering, does that at all change the equities of your publishing?
Well, it could well. It's possible that the leaker made up this document. And that's one of the things you would be concerned about.
Yeah, but Matt already gave away the game there, it seems.
Right. But it's also possible that while the leaker was Russian, and maybe the leaker was a troll farm, for all I know, that the document's still genuine.
Yes.
And so at that point, part of the story becomes the motivation of the leak. It's very possible that the leaker here is trying to sow some discord in the world. It could be the leaker is trying to make life miserable between China and the United States.
And is that motivation something worth factoring into your decision whether to go ahead with the story?
It certainly is something that I would want to note in the story if we go ahead with the story.
We realize this will sow great dissension. That appears to be the motivation of the leak.
Sorry.
Please enjoy the story.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're upfront with the reader about what the motivations of your leaker is, then absolutely, the fundamental news story could be as central to this. And a point that I would make, and probably would have in my conversation with Matt, is that we already had in the example of OPM when the Chinese came in and stole all those documents. What was the reaction of the director of national intelligence? He said, this was pretty good, nice work. If I could do the same thing, I would have done it. And now the document may have indicated he did.
But there would be, again, if assuming this is authentic, this is a real program, there would be a serious conversation. And I do think the New York Times would take it seriously, that this is a valuable program that has produced results. And if it's in the New York Times, the program will be shot.
Yes. Well, our time is drawing to a close. Our effort in this series of hypotheticals was to go deep on one of the many leaves of the tree of national security, privacy, and rule of law, and get some flavor for how the different actors, who in some way are quite used to working with one another, even though they may be in very different positions with respect to one another, how they think this stuff through. And maybe moving to the observation that it used to be that debates over individualized searches, that was a lot of what we argued about in national security and Fourth Amendment doctrine. You had some target already in mind, and then did you have what you needed to do the warrant? And you can hear in our discussion some efforts to bring back the good old days of those kinds of particularized warrants, in part because they're constitutional. And yet we see a future that is quite tempting for some parties of this kind of bulk metadata or even content surveillance that we're going to have to contend with, for which we're seeing some of the second-order effects of, do we architect systems so that they are inured to this, even though we started off with potentially, they tug at the heart, some case studies when, if it's good enough for LL Bean, how could it not be good enough for, if we could characterize it, and it's hypothetical, so we can, as long as it's plausible, a poor kid who may be under threat, or a celebrity, or some such. So among this group, it's an amazing brain trust. I see people like Chris Bavitz, Ed Felton, others in the room who themselves have had great experience in these areas. And I just hope we'll have some time when we adjourn to talk about all this stuff as a group informally before lunch. And in the meantime, I just want to thank our panelists so much for being game to have today's conversation and for thinking about these issues. Thank you all very much. Thank you.